We have a very special episode of Recruiting Roundtable today as we welcome 3 engineering leaders to discuss recruiting, interviewing, and retaining software engineers. Joining us are Blake Thomas, Head of Engineering at NoRedInk, Nick Cobb, VP of Engineering and Head of Product at Kyte, and Ken Kao, VP of Engineering at Rad AI. Blake, Nick, Ken, thank you so much for joining. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Thanks.
Great. So let's kick things off with some brief intros. I'd love to hear just a little bit about yourself and kind of your role, and maybe just a short background of your company. Let's start with Ken.
Hey, great meeting everyone. Thanks for having me on here. I'm currently a VP of Eng at Rad AI. We basically apply Gen AI for radiologists to generate their reports and for patient management. Prior to Rad AI, I was at Meta, where I ran a team that handled VR devices, system health developer infrastructure, and emulation. Before that, I was at various different startups in healthcare, blockchain, and Airbnb. Really excited to be here.
Great. Thank you, Ken. And Nick, you're up next.
Yeah, absolutely. So currently working as the head of engineering at Kyte and also working on product as well. I've been with the company about 2.5 years, and we have approximately 30 or so engineering staff. Spent 7 years at Uber and Aurora. I worked on everything from our driver application, mobile app, to self-driving and simulation development, CI/CD, and all of our backend and infra there. So yeah, excited to be here. Thanks again.
Great. Thank you, Nick. And last, Blake.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, Blake Thomas, head of engineering at NoRedInk. We build a SaaS platform that is curricular software, standards-aligned curricular software for use in English language arts classrooms. I'm pushing almost a decade in ed tech. Before that, I was in fintech. And so have spent a fair amount of time thinking about compliance, among other things, as well as good engineering.
Great. Thank you, Blake. And lastly, my name is Sean Huynh. I'm managing director at Rocket. Fun fact, I know Blake for a few years. He's a former customer, hopefully to be a future customer of mine as well. We'll have to see. We'll have to work on that a little bit. So yeah, I've done some work for Blake. Blake's an awesome engineering leader. Just a little plug for you, Blake. I also love NoRedInk. It's a great company. And yeah, I've left that company. I've joined a newer company, Rocket. I've been with Rocket a couple years now. I host this podcast. And I think for Rocket, we take a scientific approach to recruiting. That's how we like to discuss it. We combine really great recruiters. We have an AI model we've trained over 7 years, and we have an approach to sourcing we call programmatic sourcing, where we find and engage candidates in ways that aren't really possible with LinkedIn. So it's just a really interesting company, and yeah, glad to be here. So let's just jump right into it. One of the things is, you all have been scaling in engineering orgs for like different sizes. So just so we can level set, can you all share how big your engineering team is and currently, and maybe a little background on some of the teams that you've built before, whether it was 2 engineers to 20 or 200 to 500. Just love to understand the scope so we can all get on the same page. Let's start with, let's go with Nick. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. So about 2.5 years ago when I joined Kyte, we had approximately 12, I think, engineering staff in total. And we grew that largely in the first sort of year and a half or so to about 32 people in total. Mm-hmm. In previous teams, I've started with myself and 2 engineers all the way up to about 65 people or so, working on infra and developer experience and supporting an engineering team of about 1,000 engineers in total. So that's been kind of the breadth of experience in the last couple of roles.
Okay, great. And Ken?
Yeah, so I joined Rad AI about 3 months ago. We started out at about 45 engineers. We're up to about in the low 50s right now. Previously at Meta, the team I supported was over 60 engineers. And because we worked in system health and dev infra, we had to run pretty big initiatives across about 1,000 engineers as well.
Mm-hmm. And Blake?
Yeah, so current department's about 40 and change, 42, I think, 41, 42. When I joined the company, we were just under 20. In 2022, we took on a round of funding, and the goal there was to grow the department to somewhere in the 50s. We cut that a little bit short to trim our spend a little bit, but that's why we're at our current size. Prior to this, I've started with teams as small as 8, I think, with my previous company. But before that, I joined a company that was at around 25, and we grew that department to I think it was just under 150. And I had a unique experience there because I was responsible for onboarding all of the engineers. So everyone reported to me at some point. So yeah.
A lot of engineers. I'm gonna stick with you. I'm gonna stick with you, Blake, on this. So
Mhm.
I'm hearing the sweet spot's around like 50. Like I hear a lot of you guys work with engineering teams around 50. Is there a different mindset when you're hiring engineers, when your team is around 40 to 60 engineers versus when it's 2 to 5 engineers?
So yeah, absolutely. I think that the incremental impact that engineers have in with those early hires is just massive compared to later hires. That's not to say those later hires aren't important. Of course they are. But when you're hiring engineer number 2 and 3, you want to find someone who is as mission aligned and you have to think about your culture, what you're trying to build in terms of the department, what are the values of the company and the department, and how are those reflected in the folks that you bring on? How are they going to represent that culture when they go and speak at conferences and do those kinds of things? So the incremental impact is going to be a little bit less as you hire those folks. It's still going to be those folks after that 50 mark. Obviously, you still want to think about it, but it's going to be a lot more kind of solidified and systematized at that point. You're going to have like sheets that outline what the values are that you can refer to, and rubrics for interviews and those sorts of things. So that's one aspect. I think another kind of division that maybe we'll talk about is, are you hiring to fill a specific role, or are you hiring to grow the team? And those are 2 different styles of hiring as well.
Nick, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we started at Kyte, I inherited the team from a founder, and we laid down a couple of principles, values, and things. Kind of alluding to what Blake said, and we stuck with those. The whole time. I think one of the big things that we said is we want to build a world-class engineering team, and then we define what does world-class mean to us. I think the difference in hiring the early people is how many things that they can do and their capabilities of being there, over maybe a longer trajectory. Whereas the people you hire later, they might be filling a skills gap or, another situation that has emerged on the team where you need to kind of cover some technology or some kind of implementation, or maintain something that, someone left behind, something like that. So you're almost maybe covering a couple of gap areas more than you are hiring, some more generalists or kind of, maybe even early rock stars. And so I definitely echo, kind of some of the things that Blake shared. When you get later on, I think like it's important to still stick to that principle the same way you would for an early hire, because it helps, kind of solidify the type of person you want to bring in and whether or not they're going to fit that culture and they're going to learn, and then obviously take them through, some evaluation of that in the interview stage.
And Ken, I want to ask your opinion on this topic. Also, you mentioned that you were at Meta and you had a team of about like 50, 60. What are your thoughts, like when you're kind of like a engineering team within like a large or massive organization? Does that change kind of your approach to hiring, as opposed to if you're just in a company with just 50 engineers and that's all?
Absolutely. There's a very big difference. So at Meta, a big part of hiring, there's 2 types of hiring. One is you directly deal with candidates and you bring them onto the loop and interview them. We typically reserve that for very specialist type of roles. So someone with expertise in AR and VR and computer vision and devices. The second one is where they go through a general pipeline, then we have to try to get them from bootcamp. So that becomes, you're kind of in a way competing against other hiring managers within the same company for them. And so the mindset is very different, because when you're getting them from bootcamp, in a way, it's a bit of a zero-sum game. everyone is looking to hire. There's usually not enough people. When you're actually at a startup, you actually have to think more broadly about the company. Does this actually fit for the company? And is this the right thing for the company? And so you have to think much more broadly about the impact the person has and not just the role that your team is at. And so I think the mindset of thinking at the company level definitely is very different from being, for lack of a better word, middle management at a larger company.
Yeah. So I want to stick with you, Ken, and I'm going to come to you back, Nick, as well, because we talked about this, Nick, on our pre-show about a lot of companies that I've worked with. Like I've helped hundreds of companies recruit. Some of them come and say, "Oh, we want someone like from a FANG company," or someone who's a FANG, or like Airbnb or Uber or something like that. And so you've been at Meta. Nick spent many years at Uber, I believe. What do you think about this? What do you think about engineering leaders out there that say, "Hey, I want you to go recruit like a FANG engineer"? What is your thought on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've actually thought quite a bit about this. So the way I see it is people from large, for lack of a better word, let's call it tier one, well-known tech companies. They bring in a unique set of skill and experience. They have seen scale. They have seen what good looks like. They have seen processes that work. So the key there is to understand, are they part of what helped it scale? Are they part of what made the process good? Are they part of what caused Uber to be able to have real-time integration with all the users and not drop any rides, right? That's the key. So I think that is a very unique perspective, and I believe that is beneficial for any startup. At the same time, people from startup backgrounds are also useful. They are scrappy. They know how to go from 0 to 1. They might not care as much about engineering excellence, but maybe you don't need that at that point in time. And so at Rad AI, we try to find that balance. We want people from both big companies and small companies to be able to get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Nick, what are your thoughts on this? You spent many years at Uber.
Yeah, I mean, I can maybe share what might come off as a controversial opinion here, but like explicitly at Kyte, don't recruit people from FANG companies, and there's two reasons. One is in my experience at Uber, a lot of the people that we brought over from I'll just say the group of companies there, not one specific one. They had trouble working outside of the confines of the systems that were built there because they had spent so many years of their career kind of allowing those big companies to sort of make it easy for them to do their work. And in some cases, unless they were the people who built those systems, were abstracted away from the real value and the real kind of like complexity and innovation that took place. And so when it came to, how do you build a scalable system that scaffolds a service? Well, some of them can't answer that question because they worked in that system already for so many years that they haven't had a chance to build it themselves. They sort of know what the end product looks like, but they're not sure really how to get it there. But if you ask them to build a microservice, they're very good at that, right? And so it really depended on, for us at Kyte, like what do we need? And we added a mix of senior folks who had kind of seen this bits and atoms type company where they had the experience of an on the ground business. Some folks coming from Uber, some folks coming from the mapping world also, where they've had to use hardware and sensors to collect data and then process that. A lot of what we do with the rental cars that we use at Kyte. So in some cases, it made sense to go after more of the expertise we needed and less the sort of experience with scale. And we had the similar experience at Uber where the scale was important. But there were still a lot of systems that even Uber as a 3, 4, 5, and then the self-driving team as only a 2-3-year-old organization, they didn't have those things in place. And so they needed to kind of get the people that can build those as opposed to get the people who can work in those systems.
Mm-hmm. And so Blake, going to you now, I know when we worked together, it's been a few years. So if you mentioned this to me and I can't remember, I apologize. But I don't think you ever said anything, whether it was FANG or not, to me. For you, it was they need to have experience or at least a passion in Elm and or Haskell. Yeah. And that was kind of NoRedInk's kind of position. Is that A, still the position? And B, also, could you touch on the FANG piece?
Yeah. I'm going to start with I'll start with the functional programming first. One of the things that I have found pretty consistently talking to engineers, both inside of NoRedInk and outside of NoRedInk, is there are certain topics that tend to be very polarizing. There are folks who really love functional languages and love working with functional languages, and there are folks that are are not excited about that prospect. And one of the biggest predictors in terms of retention and performance is engagement. And if you're not excited about the languages and the tools that you're using, it's going to be really hard for you to stick around for a long time. It's going to be really hard for the company to retain you ultimately. And the flip side is that because of the nature of those languages, they really are comparatively, like if I want to go and find someone who's written some Ruby or Java or something like that, I can almost throw a rock on the street. I don't do that often, but I could almost throw a rock walking down the street and hit someone that does. The same is not true for Haskell and Elm, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's not the kind of thing where I can say, oh, we need to only hire engineers who have 5 years of experience with this or that technology, because that's going to limit my pool so dramatically that I'm not going to be able to find folks. What we were trying to elicit there is this idea that they should at least be excited about the prospect of using those technologies, because if that as table stakes isn't there, then it's hard for me to expect that to pan out in their interest and in the company's interest. I was thinking about the FANG company thing I've thought about it a lot too. And I'm going to open up the door, though not go on, open up the door for a kind of rant or a soapbox moment, I suppose. Resumes are profoundly reductive. So what do I mean by that? Resumes give you a few key points, a few bullets about each one of those roles. And the reality is that I've known folks who worked at a FANG company or a tier 1 company who did amazing things. And I've also known folks who were kind of just hangers on. And that's not always the easiest thing to spot from a resume, right? That's one of the reasons why our interview process is the way it is, because we really do make a point to try and learn as much as we can about candidates. I will say, as a kind of guidance on that, though, that it's ideal to look for folks who were around for like epoch shifts. So if you see a company that has gone from 20 to 200, it's helpful to find someone who was there for that transition, because those are the folks who are most likely to understand the nuts and bolts of having navigated that transition. And the same applies for tier 1 or FANG companies as well. So if you find folks who only have 18 months of experience at one of these companies and it's very recent, maybe not. Again, resumes are reductive. But if you see someone who was there around the launch of like a new line of business or a new product or some key evolutionary leap for that company, chances are they're going to have something to say about it and have learned something from it that can apply to your endeavor.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. I know, Blake, something that NoRedInk does really well is you're very involved in the Elm community. And so you've built kind of an engineering culture built around like technology, right? So I want to push it to the other guys on the panel. How do you attract software engineers to come work for you at Kyte and Rad AI to make them excited? Like, is it like the tech stack? Is it like an engineering culture? I'm curious. Let's start with Ken. Ken, how do you attract engineers to come join you?
Yeah, so we typically have about 2 different avenues that we go for. The first one is around the mission. And so oftentimes we have a lot of strong engineers who've done a lot and they've probably done well in their career. And let's face it, the FANG companies can pay a lot more, right? I came from Meta, so I know exactly how much Meta and Google and Apple pays. But oftentimes people are in it to do something more. How can I make sure the software I write, the code I write, can help do good for the world, can help patient outcome? And so I think that is actually a super strong motivator for a lot of our engineers to join us. The second is around AI. So we're kind of lucky in that we get to kind of leverage both points. Obviously, AI is pretty hot nowadays. At Rad AI, we can kind of demonstrate that we've built our own LLM from the ground up with transformers. And we have multiple language models, some using proprietary models from other companies, some using open source with fine-tuning, and some are built from the ground up. So we kind of also showcase our technical depth. Like, we are not just someone who's a GPT wrapper. We actually built our own LLMs for some of our use cases, and we fine-tune some open source with other, and we use other proprietary models for other things. And so showcasing the technical depth is also a way to really attract the engineers. Last is around culture. to your point, like we want to show that an IC's individual contributors can excel equally as managers. That has been a huge selling point since I joined. In fact, after I joined, 3 managers voluntarily moved from management to IC roles because previously they thought being a manager is the only way to grow their career. And so I think showcasing that as an IC, you can be as senior and as influential as a manager is one of the key things that we also do to make sure that people enjoy their time here and want to join us.
It's so interesting on the career path piece. Like I'm more a salesperson. I've been in sales for my whole life. And I would say there's 2 kind of areas where I think employees, candidates, whatever you want to say, they think they want to go a certain way, but then a lot of times they don't actually want to. Sales. So everyone's like, I want to be a VP of sales. To be honest, most people who say that don't actually want to be VP of sales. On the other side, I want to be VP of Eng. You know what? A lot of the engineers I talk to say that they actually don't want that, right? Because they're more comfortable being an IC, but they feel like, you know, being an Eng manager, a director, a VP, a CTO is the path, but it's really not for everyone. Nick, how do you go about engaging and, you know, getting engineers excited about Kyte?
Yeah, I think I find that for the most part, you know, when folks come to us, or, you know, even if we do a cold reach out, like they have made some decision that, okay, well, this seems interesting, or, you know, the product is something that I could be excited about, or at least let's like learn about the technology, right? And so I think some of those things become cursory parts to the discussion. What people really, I think, join a company for is the ability to have an impact, and how the work that they will do will sort of like resonate or be felt through that impact, what that impact is. And so I think it's really important to be able to articulate, like, why do you need that infra position, or why do you need that backend position or full stack position? What team is it going to sit on? What's the purpose of the role? And like, why are they going to be the right person, or this particular role is going to be the right seat for them that's going to, you know, kind of build that growth and development in their career. And I think it's important as engineering leaders that we have at least that 12 to 18 months kind of outlook for where do we plan to take the business and the team, and how are we plan to influence the business with engineering work, and maybe product work if we're doing it as well. And say, you know, these are the things that I can point to that in the next 3 months will have an impact. In the next 12 months will be, you know, kind of the direction that you're taking us. And that's, you know, as a direct result of the work that you're doing. And by the way, that will, you know, exponentially help you grow compared to, you know, the alternative options, basically. And so I think some of that sales pitch is really kind of like building a message and a plan that actually resonates with that person, and kind of tailoring that plan to their individual goals, and making sure that when they start, they have, you know, some optionality to work on those things that fit their plan.
That's a great point. And lastly, I want to circle back to you, Blake. I kind of have an idea, but talk to us about how NoRedInk does it, and how do you attract engineers to come join you?
Yeah, so I want to say that several of the things you touched on, Nick, really resonate with me. Same thing, Ken. Like Ken, when you talked about mission, that's a big selling point for us. Obviously, I mean, we're talking about education for kids in school. Like it almost sells itself. And then Nick, when you were talking about impact, I think that engineers are absolutely looking to see that the work that they do is going to matter. They want to matter. There's the idealistic version of that, which is they want to know that they're leaving something behind them that is valued and valuable. And then there's the really pragmatic thing there, which is, you know, in a world where companies do layoffs and things like that, they want to know that there's some stability there. And that comes from knowing that the work that they're doing is somehow central to the mission of the organization or whatever. For us, a big part of it is essentially building an employer brand, right? There's a reason why most of the folks who speak at conferences from NoRedInk have done so with a NoRedInk t-shirt. I know a lot of companies do that, but a lot of it has to do with the kind of like engagement and joy that they have with the community in general, and what we built there as well. I would love to see us do the same thing with Haskell, and we've been talking about that. One of the aspects that we talked about as a plus side for choosing Haskell as a backend technology that we want to move towards is the fact that the community is large enough for us to have an impact on the community if we really invest in it. the same can't be said about some of the other choices that we might have considered. So employer branding is a really important component for us, and we invest in it. There's, so I work in the Chicago area or whatever. So I'm a member of the Chicago technology community. And one of the things that I've seen in that community, you've got the Chicago Board of Trade, you've got you've got a lot of ad revenue based companies and companies like that. And so for the longest time, I would think about refining my elevator pitch, right? Like, what do I say to someone when I run into an engineer? And I got it down to the fastest thing possible, which was whether you're in fintech, whether you're in ad tech, whatever, your product boils down to money. And my product boils down to kids' educational futures. And I'm going to win that one every time. And I'm going to win that one every time was part of the pitch too. Like somehow claiming to have won helps you win. I don't know. The last thing I'll say is, and this is kind of building a little bit on what you said, Nick, like that impact piece. Engineers are at their core builders, even the folks who go into some version of leadership. We like to see things built. We like to be a part of building things. And I remember so my father was a construction worker, and we used to drive through one of the nearby cities where he worked. And he would point out buildings on the skyline and say, "Do you see that? I built that." Now that's a little bit of hyperbole, not as much as you might think. But I just remember the pride that he had in being able to point to something and saying, "I left my mark in a very visible way." And I think that builders really do enjoy that kind of a thing. All the much greater if it's a mission-driven company. So I think really highlighting mission, highlighting how they can have an impact on that mission, highlighting how they can exist in the community and engage with the community and have that be a positive experience, and building a brand that communicates all of that and does so in a way that is compelling to candidates is going to be helpful. I don't want to diminish the career stuff. I think all of that is really critical, but yeah, employer branding, can't say enough about it.
It's great. A couple points on that. So I used to work for an app development company, and we built streaming apps. I remember I used to ask the engineers, I'm like, "Hey, why do you work here? Like, it's a services company. You could go work at Airbnb or something." And they're like, "Oh, I love building streaming apps because I can go to my aunt at Thanksgiving dinner and have her download the app." So that was kind of what motivated them. The other thing too, on the tech stack, it's interesting. I worked for a big client of ours. They had an Elixir tech stack, and I'm not sure why they picked Elixir, but it was really hard to find backend engineers. So we made a lot of concessions with them to try to find Ruby people because it was similar to Elixir. So it's interesting. The tech stack decisions will definitely really impact your ability to recruit and the pool, and how you manage that is really important. Okay, I want to talk to a very interesting topic we talked to all of you gentlemen about prior, which is technical interviews. So I'd love to get your thoughts on your approach to technical interviews, what you think works, what you think doesn't work. And we'll go from there. Let's start with Nick. Nick, what are your thoughts on technical interviews?
Yeah, I mean, I shared this probably in the other meeting, but yeah, not a fan of take-home tests. I think they're easily gamed. I think some folks, they don't necessarily spend as much diligence on them as well. So I prefer to do things live. It also gives an opportunity for the interviewer to kind of see how the person, works through problems with a peer and understands, kind of their mentality a little bit. So I prefer to do those things live. Technical interview wise, I mean, important to establish a baseline of, does the person have the technical background and experience to solve the challenges that are important to the company, not for the next 6 months, but for the next 2 years, in my opinion, is kind of the average trajectory that we want to shoot for. And separately, do they have the learning ability and growth ability and the right attitude around those things to sort of extend that longevity well beyond 2 years? And then the company should meet them, with the incentives and the other things that help with, extending that longevity. So I think technical interview is super important, but I also think it's only, part of the story there.
Mm-hmm. Ken, what about yourself?
Yeah, we do a combination of take-home project and potentially live coding as well. We oftentimes let the candidates choose. Some people are not as comfortable in live coding environments. They prefer take-home project and vice versa. But even if they do a take-home project, we make sure to have a walkthrough in the live session about how they make the design choices, why did they do something, and we also ask them to make some small changes in the live session. What if we would add this feature? What if we would change that, to demonstrate that they can actually do coding? The other part that I think is actually really important is around system design. I've found that for the more junior and mid-level engineers, we care a lot about their ability to use the technology and to code. But for the more senior engineers, we really care about how they think about architecture, how they think about design, how they think about trade-offs. And so I've found that for the more senior people, the coding session is a little bit less signal, and the system design sections tend to be much higher signal for us.
Interesting. And Blake?
Yeah, the challenge with technical interviews is always one about, like, first of all, in some degree, you have to index on candidate experience. I've definitely been a part of interview processes where, I get, in my IC days, where I get an email that says, hey, we want you to complete this take home. It should take this amount of time. And then it takes, 3 times that amount of time to do a good job. Or hey, in an attempt to be completely fair, this is actually going to be timed, and all of those. And then the flip side, we're going to have you code in front of someone who's going to be watching you, like that. All of those can be stressful for different candidates, and so I think you have to be really thoughtful about calibrating for a good candidate experience. That being said, we actually do both. We do a take home and we do an in-person. And part of the reason there is it boils down to what is the purpose of the interview, right? So we can talk about the more specific purpose about assessing their technical skills, but I'm going to get down to like kind of brass tacks and admit that, like, there are really 2 different types of these. There's filter interviews, and then there's assessment interviews. Depending on how many candidates you have, you want to level set and make sure they can at least write some lines of code that are cogent. To Nick's point, they may well ask a roommate for some help, or jump on Stack Overflow or something. But in theory, they should be able to put together a cogent piece of code that does something, right? And that's really the point there. It's table stakes. It's not about, for us at least, it's not about assessing like, ooh, did you is this well unit tested, and did you do all the things that you're supposed to do, and all of that. It's, can you put code together that does a thing? And then assessment is less about table stakes and more about looking at those nuances, looking at, do they think about the ramifications for how this is going to be used? Do they follow TDD, or do they not really prioritize testing? Do they think about secure coding practices, those kinds of things? Those are best assessed live. I don't think you can actually really assess those with a take home at all, because so much of them are built in conversation and along the way. There's another thing that I like to bring up here, which is so many technical assessments are greenfield. It's like, here's a problem, start from scratch, solve the problem. How much of our career as ICs is actually greenfield? It's like maybe 5% of what we do. The vast majority of programming is, here's some code, you know something about the domain, and you may know something about this code that does something, make it do something else. So Ken, when you were talking about that additive or that modifying piece, I think that's a great call out. We actually, at a previous company, used to use this approach where we'd have them do a take home, and then when they came in, we'd actually have them modify it to add some functionality, which I feel like is a pretty good approach for those technical assessments. The last thing I'll say is there's always this tension between, do you choose a technical assessment that's really generic, that, it has the same shape of the kind of problems that you're solving at your company, but it's, fundamentally different, or do you try to choose something that's as realistic as possible? And I've seen advocates of both. I think you need to gravitate more towards the generic, because most folks coming in aren't going to have that specific human capital, that knowledge of how you do the thing you do as a company. But you do want to match the shape. So I think that tension is a healthy tension, and you want to split the difference. For our purposes, we use a take home, and then we have basically an hour and a half of pairwise coding with someone who is an interviewer, but it's very conversational. Yeah, that's our approach.
So it's very interesting. I think there's no right way to do it. I've worked with probably over close to 200 engineering and talent acquisition leaders, and there's no consensus. So I don't think there ever will be.
I'll jump in briefly and just say I absolutely agree. There are definitely wrong ways to do it, though. Just wanted to say.
All right. That's a whole other podcast. So this is gonna be the last question before I wrap up. This has been a great episode, gentlemen. I want to just ask if you have any any tooling in your recruiting stack, I guess, that you've used or you've tried out before that you maybe want to share with the audience or the other people on the call, whether it's like a technical assessment platform or something else. Just curious if there's been any tools that have made your life and your interviewer's life easier throughout the process. Let's start with Ken.
Oh, I haven't thought about anything in particular. I think one key part is I've started to realize not every company uses the ATS to its full automated extent. Mm-hmm. And so for us, even just using the same ATS, but making sure everything's automated, the interview panels are set up properly. When you do a click, it automatically sends out all the different interview panels. And then you can actually ask candidates for availability times and the interviewer sync it up with the interviewer's calendars. That mm-hmm. I've found to actually be really helpful. I think most ATSs have that functionality, but not every startup or company has configured it to the full extent. At Meta, it was all automated, but that's because Meta built its recruiting tool in-house. And so for other companies, I think just learning how to configure it properly with ATS, that saves a lot of recruiting time and a lot of hiring manager interviewers' time.
Just organizing interviews is just a headache in itself. Yeah. What about you, Nick? Have you used any tools that have helped with the interviewing process?
Yeah, I agree that I think not all companies use the ATS like fully. And I think also, it's something I've seen at Kyte is like the company formation process. Like there's not a lot of experience with recruiting on founding teams. And so like often what you inherit is like a set of tools that actually don't work together. And so you have to kind of like go find the tools that will work together. Mm-hmm. So I think, there's just like some strange technical debt there of SaaS products that sometimes like as a result.
They call it the Franken stack. That's what I've been told.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good term. Yeah. I think probably, the standard pair programming tools are really useful. I think people like to debug things together. They like to share things. So I don't think there's like a ton of super big insights there. But I think one thing that I have found to be more successful in both kind of like guiding and growing engineers to be good interviewers is to also not 100% script their scorecard, but to definitely give them prompts to say, hey, like these are the items that we want to sort of get signal on. And these are, and that's different on a leveling basis, right? And so we have certain expectations. How does that candidate meet the expectations of the level or the role that they're going to be sitting in? And kind of prompting them through the scorecard, feedback system to say, hey, like, we do want to ask these questions in a debrief setting and kind of get signal on this particular stuff. And if we don't, then we need to go back and maybe have, additional conversation with the candidate. So that's been helpful in making sure that we feel like we did a well-rounded, evaluation.
Okay, great. And Blake, you want to take us home?
Yeah. So I want to echo everything that was said about the ATS that you're using, like learn it, know it. It's just find what it can do for you. Like as a hiring manager, as a company, you're gonna get a lot of benefit there. I am going to call out a couple of specific things. I talked about indexing on candidate experience. Don't ask them to use an environment that they don't know if you can avoid it. Like we all have highly customized personal development environments. Like use screen sharing software and let them develop on their local machine if you can. If you can't, look for something really generic. There are some online REPLs that you can use. I wouldn't advise it, but it's an okay approach. And then it is not my practice to normally call out companies, but I am going to call one out really quick. CodeScreen in May of last year added Elm to their supported languages. So I want you to imagine for a second, like if NoRedInk is a company that features Elm development so highly were to ask folks to complete code assessments on a platform that didn't support Elm, that's not such a great look. And so for the longest time, we were like hand assessing these take homes, right? We definitely we're looking for ways to automate that, and it's nice to see that at least one in the form of CodeScreen, one company is adding that support to their tool. So I wanted to call that out in particular.
That's great. Well, shout out to CodeScreen.
Yep.
Ken, Blake, Nick, thank you guys so much. This is a really interesting conversation. I really appreciate all your time. This has been an amazing episode. Thank you, everyone for tuning in. This is Recruiting Roundtable. So until next time, happy hunting.